In the heart of Savannah, where the humid air hung thick with the scent of magnolias and the unspoken truths of the South, the Devereaux triplets were the city's most prized jewels. Born in the grandest mansion on Chippewa Square, the identical sisters, Miss Eleanor, Miss Beatrice, and Miss Cordelia, were celebrated for their ethereal beauty, their porcelain skin a stark contrast to the verdant drapery of Spanish moss that adorned the ancient oaks. The year was 1844, a time when a young lady's virtue was her most valuable currency, and the Devereaux name was synonymous with wealth, power, and unwavering propriety. But within the opulent walls of their Greek revival home, a silent rebellion was brewing, a tempest of forbidden desires that threatened to shatter the very foundations of their gilded world. Their mother, the formidable matriarch, Mrs. Arabella Devereaux, a woman whose smile was as sharp as her wit, governed her household with an iron fist, clad in the finest silk. Her daughters were her masterpieces, their futures meticulously planned from the moment of their birth. They were to be paragons of Southern womanhood, destined for advantageous marriages that would further solidify the Devereaux dynasty. Yet, for all her meticulous planning, Mrs. Devereaux failed to account for the unpredictable nature of the human heart, for the silent, knowing glances exchanged in the hushed corridors of her own home. Each of the triplets, though identical in appearance, possessed a spirit as distinct as the patterns on a butterfly's wings. Eleanor, the eldest by a mere 7 minutes, was the pragmatist, her mind as sharp as the needles she used for her intricate embroidery. Beatrice, the second-born, was the romantic, her soul filled with the poetry she devoured in the quiet solitude of the family library. And Cordelia, the youngest, was the firebrand, her spirit as untamed as the wild horses she longed to ride freely across the open fields. Their world, a carefully constructed stage of societal expectations, was irrevocably altered by the arrival of 3 new servants to the Devereaux household. They were not just faces in the background, but individuals whose presence ignited a spark within each of the sisters, a flame that would either illuminate their lives or consume them in its destructive path. For in the shadowed corners of Savannah's most respectable home, a love story, as scandalous as it was profound, was about to unfold, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart to defy the constraints of a society built on prejudice and fear. The Georgia sun, a relentless sovereign in the summer sky, beat down upon the cobblestone streets of Savannah, its golden rays filtering through the dense canopy of live oaks, casting a dappled and ever-shifting pattern upon the world below. Inside the Devereaux mansion, the air was thick with a cloying sweetness, a mixture of wilting magnolias and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of lemon oil used to polish the mahogany furniture to a gleaming perfection. The silence of the afternoon was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a constant and unwavering reminder of the slow, deliberate passage of time in the antebellum South. Miss Eleanor Devereaux, her needle poised mid-air, sat by the window in the morning room, her brow furrowed in concentration. The linen in her embroidery hoop was stretched taut, the delicate threads of silk forming the petals of a rose so lifelike it seemed to blush under her skilled fingers. But her mind was not on her handiwork. Her thoughts, like the shimmering heat outside, were restless and unsettled. It had been a month since their arrival, a month since the still waters of her carefully ordered life had been disturbed. He was the new stable hand, a man named Samuel, whose quiet strength and gentle hands with the horses had not gone unnoticed by the eldest triplet. She had watched him from this very window, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, his shirt clinging to the hard muscles of his back as he curried her father's prized stallion. There was a stillness about him, a centeredness that she, in her world of rigid etiquette and unspoken rules, found both fascinating and unnerving. He was a man of the earth, his hands calloused and stained with the soil, a stark contrast to the soft, lily-white hands of the gentleman who called upon her and her sisters, their conversation as polished and empty as the porcelain teacups from which they drank. Beatrice, ever the dreamer, was lost in a world of her own, a leather-bound volume of Lord Byron's poetry resting in her lap. She sat in the darkest corner of the library, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the afternoon glare, the only light coming from the flickering flame of a single candle. Her infatuation was with James, the new footman, a young man with eyes the color of the twilight sky and a smile that could melt the iciest of hearts. He was a poet in his own right, though his verses were not written on paper, but in the graceful way he moved, the quiet dignity with which he performed his duties. She had heard him humming a sorrowful tune one evening as he polished the silver, a melody so hauntingly beautiful that it had brought tears to her eyes. It was a song of longing, of a love that could never be, and in its melancholic notes, she heard the echo of her own burgeoning and impossible feelings. Cordelia, unable to sit still for more than a few moments at a time, paced the length of the veranda, her silk dress rustling with each impatient step. Her gaze was fixed on the garden below, where Thomas, the new gardener, was tending to her mother's prized roses. He was a man of the sun, his skin burnished to a deep bronze, his laughter as free and unrestrained as the wildflowers that grew in the meadows beyond the city. He had a way with the earth, a connection to the living, breathing world that she, a caged bird in a gilded cage, envied with every fiber of her being. She had seen him rescue a fallen fledgling from the jaws of a cat, his large, gentle hands cradling the tiny creature with a tenderness that had made her heart ache. He was life, raw and untamed, and she was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. The arrival of the three men, each assigned to a different corner of the Devereaux estate, had been a matter of necessity, a consequence of the previous servant's sudden and unexplained departure. Mrs. Devereaux had been most displeased by the inconvenience, but even she, with her all-seeing eyes, had failed to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere of her home. She saw only their competence, their efficiency, their unwavering obedience. She did not see the stolen glances, the hushed whispers, the lingering touches that were becoming a dangerous and intoxicating currency in the silent language of forbidden love. The sisters, bound by blood and a shared secret, had not yet spoken of their individual infatuations, but a silent understanding had passed between them. It was there in the way Eleanor's fingers trembled as she threaded her needle, in the way Beatrice's sigh escaped her lips as she turned a page of her book, in the way Cordelia's cheeks flushed as she watched the gardener at his work. The Devereaux triplets, the darlings of Savannah society, were in love, and their hearts, for the first time in their lives, were beating to a rhythm that was entirely their own. The still waters of their lives had indeed been unsettled, and the ripples, they knew, were destined to become a tidal wave. The oppressive heat of the day had finally relented, giving way to a balmy evening, the air filled with the symphony of crickets and the distant mournful cry of a whip-poor-will. The Devereaux family was seated around the grand dining table, the flickering candlelight casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The conversation, as always, was a carefully orchestrated performance, a series of polite inquiries and well-rehearsed responses. Mr. Devereaux, a man whose presence was as solid and unyielding as the oak from which the table was carved, spoke of cotton prices and the upcoming mayoral election. Mrs. Devereaux, her back ramrod straight, her diamonds glittering in the soft light, offered her opinions on the latest fashions from Paris and the deplorable manners of the new preacher's wife. The triplets, their faces a mask of demure attention, played their parts to perfection. They smiled when it was expected of them, offered a polite murmur of agreement when it was required, and sipped their wine with a grace that belied the turmoil in their hearts. But their eyes, those windows to the soul that even the most accomplished actress cannot completely control, betrayed them. Their gazes would dart, for a fleeting moment, to the figures who moved in the shadows of the room, the silent and almost invisible servants who attended to their every need. Eleanor, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, found her eyes drawn to Samuel, who stood stoically by the sideboard, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of the dining room. He had been brought in from the stables to assist with the serving, a rare occurrence that sent a jolt of both fear and excitement through her. She watched the way the candlelight caught the high cheekbones of his face, the way his strong, capable hands moved with a surprising delicacy as he refilled her father's wine glass. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a spark igniting in the space between them, a silent acknowledgement of a connection that defied the rigid social order of their world. He quickly looked away, his expression unreadable, but it was too late. The seed of their secret had been planted. Beatrice, her romantic heart soaring, followed James's every move as he glided around the table, his movements as fluid and graceful as a dancer's. He was a phantom in the background, his presence meant to be felt but not seen. Yet to Beatrice, he was the most vibrant person in the room. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible things about him. The way a lock of his dark hair fell across his forehead, the slight tremor in his hand as he placed a serving dish before her. The way his lips curved into a ghost of a smile when he thought no one was watching. When he leaned in to clear her plate, his arm brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and longing, and he met her gaze with a look of such profound sadness that it nearly broke her heart. Cordelia, her rebellious spirit chafing at the confines of the formal dinner, found her attention wandering to the open French doors that led to the garden. Thomas was out there, she knew, tending to the night-blooming jasmine, their intoxicating scent a fragrant reminder of his presence. She imagined him under the silvery light of the moon, his hands in the cool, dark earth, his face upturned to the star-dusted sky. She longed to be out there with him, to feel the soft grass beneath her bare feet, to breathe in the heady scent of the flowers, to listen to the secrets of the night whispered on the gentle breeze. When James entered the room carrying a silver tray of desserts, he handed her a small folded piece of paper along with her slice of pecan pie. Her heart leaped into her throat. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it under the cover of the tablecloth. "The white rose by the fountain will bloom for you at midnight," it read. A thrill of a dangerous and exhilarating excitement shot through her. The symphony of stolen glances, of hushed whispers and fleeting touches, was a dangerous game, a clandestine performance played out under the very noses of the unsuspecting Devereaux parents. The triplets, each in their own way, were being drawn deeper into a world of forbidden emotions, a world where the lines between master and servant, between propriety and passion, were becoming increasingly blurred. The risks were immeasurable, the consequences of discovery unthinkable, but in the intoxicating and treacherous dance of their secret loves, the Georgia triplets were, for the first time in their lives, truly and breathtakingly alive. The seeds of rebellion, sown in the fertile ground of their discontent, were beginning to sprout, and the Devereaux mansion, for all its outward appearance of order and tranquility, was about to become a battleground of the heart. The gloaming, that magical hour between sunset and complete darkness, descended upon Savannah like a soft purple veil. The air, still warm from the day's sun, was now tinged with the coolness of the approaching night, a gentle caress on the skin. It was a time of secrets, a time when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the stars to emerge and bear witness to the hidden desires of the human heart. For the Devereaux triplets, the gloaming had become a sacred and clandestine time, a brief and precious interlude in their carefully orchestrated lives when they could shed their masks of propriety and speak of the things that truly mattered. They met in their shared sitting room, a space that had been their sanctuary since childhood, its walls adorned with faded floral wallpaper and a collection of their treasured porcelain dolls. The room, with its comfortable, overstuffed chairs and the faint, lingering scent of lavender, was a world away from the formal, imposing spaces of the rest of the mansion. Here, they were not the celebrated Devereaux triplets, the jewels of Savannah society, but simply Eleanor, Beatrice, and Cordelia, three sisters bound by a love that was as deep and unwavering as the roots of the ancient oaks that surrounded their home. It was Eleanor, the ever-pragmatic and responsible one, who broke the silence. Her voice, usually so calm and measured, was tinged with a vulnerability that her sisters had rarely heard. "I cannot seem to get him out of my mind," she confessed, her gaze fixed on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug beneath her feet. "Samuel, there is a quiet dignity about him, a strength that I have never encountered in any of the gentlemen who call upon us." She looked up at her sisters, her eyes pleading for understanding. Am I losing my senses?" Beatrice, her heart overflowing with a newfound empathy for her sister, reached out and took her hand. "No, Eleanor, you are not losing your senses," she said, her voice a soft and reassuring whisper. "You are simply feeling, truly feeling, for the first time." She then, with a shy and hesitant smile, confessed her own secret. "It is James for me. He has the soul of a poet, I'm sure of it. I see it in his eyes, in the way he carries himself. He is like a character from one of my books, a hero in disguise. Cordelia, her spirit too restless to be contained in a chair, paced the room, her hands clasped behind her back. And I, she declared, a note of defiance in her voice, am utterly and hopelessly captivated by Thomas. He is real. He is not afraid to get his hands dirty, to feel the sun on his skin, to laugh from the depths of his soul. He is everything that our world is not. She stopped her pacing and turned to face her sisters, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. What is happening to us? We are the Devereaux triplets. We are supposed to marry wealthy, respectable men, to become the mistresses of our own grand homes, to continue the Devereaux legacy. We are not supposed to be in love with our mother's servants. The weight of their shared secret, now spoken aloud, hung in the air, a tangible and powerful force. They were treading on dangerous ground, they knew. The society in which they lived was a rigid and unforgiving one, its rules as unbending as the iron gates that surrounded their home. A liaison between a woman of their standing and a servant was not just a scandal, it was an unthinkable transgression, a betrayal of everything their family name represented. The consequences of discovery would be swift and severe, not just for them, but for the men who had captured their hearts. "What are we to do?" Eleanor whispered, the question a fragile and desperate plea. Beatrice, ever the romantic, was the first to find her voice. "We must be careful," she said, her grip on her sister's hand tightening. "We must be discreet. But we cannot deny our hearts. To do so would be a far greater betrayal than any we could commit against our family or society." Cordelia, her spirit ignited by her sister's words, nodded in agreement. "Beatrice is right," she said, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "We have been living our lives according to a script written by others. It is time we started writing our own story." And so, in the hushed intimacy of their shared sitting room, a pact was made. They would not surrender to the fear that gnawed at the edges of their newfound happiness. They would protect each other, support each other, and in the secret and shadowed corners of their gilded cage, they would nurture the fragile and beautiful flower of their forbidden loves. The whispers in the gloaming had become a declaration of independence, a quiet but powerful rebellion against the world that sought to define them. The Devereaux triplets, for so long the perfect and obedient daughters, were about to become the authors of their own destiny, and the story they were about to write would be one of passion, of courage, and of a love that dared to defy the odds. In the carefully curated world of the Devereaux sisters, where words were often used to conceal rather than to reveal, a new and secret language had begun to flourish. It was a language of flowers, a silent and eloquent form of communication that allowed them to express the deepest desires of their hearts without uttering a single incriminating word. The garden, once a symbol of their mother's rigid control, had become their clandestine post office, a place where messages of love and longing were exchanged under the watchful and unsuspecting eyes of Savannah society. It was Cordelia, the most daring of the three, who had initiated this secret correspondence. Her connection with Thomas, the gardener, was a natural and organic one, rooted in their shared love of the earth and its vibrant, untamed beauty. One afternoon, as she was inspecting her mother's roses, a task she had suddenly taken a great interest in, she found a single perfect white rose lying on the stone bench by the fountain. Tucked within its delicate petals was a small, folded piece of paper. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she unfolded it. It was a line from a poem she had once read aloud in the garden, a verse about a love as pure and radiant as the moon. It was a message meant only for her, a confirmation of the unspoken connection that had been growing between them. From that day on, the garden became a place of secret assignations, of messages hidden in plain sight. A red rose left on the sundial was a declaration of passionate love, a sprig of lavender on the garden gate, a plea for a secret meeting, a pansy tucked into the pages of a book, a sign that the sender was thinking of her. Thomas, with his intimate knowledge of the language of flowers, was a masterful communicator, his floral messages a constant and intoxicating reminder of his affection. Cordelia, in turn, would leave her own messages for him, a ribbon tied around a particular branch, a single petal left on the path to the stables, a whispered word to the wind that she hoped would find its way to his ears. Beatrice, inspired by her sister's ingenuity, soon found her own way to communicate with James. Her medium was not flowers, but books. She would leave a volume of poetry on the library table, a particular passage marked with a pressed flower, a line underlined with a faint pencil stroke. It was a subtle and intellectual courtship, a meeting of minds and souls that transcended the boundaries of their respective stations. James, in return, would leave his own messages for her. A single, perfect word written on a scrap of paper and tucked into the book she was currently reading. A quote from a play that mirrored the unspoken drama of their own lives. Their love story was being written in the margins of the great works of literature, a secret and beautiful footnote to the grand narrative of human passion. Eleanor, the most cautious of the sisters, was hesitant to engage in such a risky and overt form of communication. Her connection with Samuel was a more silent and intuitive one, a bond forged in shared glances and unspoken understandings. But even she, in her own subtle and discreet way, found a way to bridge the chasm that separated them. She took to leaving a small embroidered handkerchief on the stable door, each one a different color, each color with its own secret meaning. A white handkerchief was a sign of her purity and innocence, a blue one, a symbol of her loyalty and faithfulness, a pale pink one, a shy and tentative confession of her growing affection. Samuel, in return, would leave a small, polished stone on her windowsill, a piece of a bird's feather, a wildflower from the meadows beyond the city. They were simple and humble gifts, but to Eleanor, they were more precious than the finest jewels. The language of flowers, of books, of colors, was a dangerous and exhilarating game, a constant and delicious secret that bound the sisters together in a web of shared complicity. They were living on a knife's edge, they knew, their happiness a fragile and precarious thing that could be shattered by a single careless mistake. But the thrill of their secret loves, the intoxicating sweetness of their forbidden connections, was a powerful and irresistible force. They were no longer the passive and obedient daughters of Arabella Devereux, but active participants in their own lives, the heroines of their own romantic and clandestine stories. The Devereux mansion, with its rigid rules and suffocating propriety, had become a stage for a silent and beautiful opera, a symphony of secret messages and stolen moments that was being conducted by the passionate and courageous hearts of three young women who dared to love in a world that had forbidden them to do so. The annual Midsummer Night's Ball at the Devereux Mansion was the most anticipated event of the Savannah social season. It was a night of opulence and extravagance, a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to showcase the Devereux family's wealth, power, and impeccable taste. The mansion, usually a place of quiet and restrained elegance, was transformed into a glittering wonderland. Hundreds of candles flickered in the crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting in the polished marble floors and the 1,000 tiny diamonds on the ladies' gowns. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the intoxicating aroma of expensive perfume. An orchestra, hidden behind a bower of ferns and roses, played a waltz, its romantic and lilting melody a siren call to the dance floor. The Devereux triplets, dressed in identical gowns of pale blue silk, were the undisputed belles of the ball. They moved through the crowded ballroom with a grace and poise that captivated all who beheld them. They smiled, they curtsied, they exchanged polite and witty banter with the stream of handsome and eligible young men who vied for their attention. But beneath their masks of serene and charming indifference, their hearts were in turmoil. For on this night of public display and societal expectation, their secret loves were a constant and tantalizing presence, a hidden and dangerous current that ran beneath the glittering surface of the ball. Eleanor, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a wealthy and respectable cotton planter, found her gaze drawn to the figure of Samuel, who stood by the open doors to the veranda, his livery as immaculate as his stoic and unreadable expression. He was a sentinel at the edge of her world, a silent and powerful presence that made her heart ache with a longing that was almost unbearable. When the cotton planter, his breath smelling of bourbon and self-satisfaction, asked for her hand in a dance, she politely declined, pleading a sudden and inexplicable headache. She escaped to the veranda, her heart pounding in her chest, and found Samuel standing there, his back to the ballroom, his gaze fixed on the star-dusted sky. "It is a beautiful night," she said, her voice a soft and tentative whisper. He turned to her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. "Yes, Miss Eleanor," he said, his voice a low and respectful rumble. "It is." They stood in silence for a moment, the music from the ballroom a distant and romantic backdrop to their stolen and forbidden encounter. I find it all so suffocating," she confessed, a note of desperation in her voice. This endless parade of polite and meaningless conversation." He looked at her, a flicker of something she could not quite decipher in his eyes. "It is a world I know little of, miss," he said, his voice gentle. "And I," she said, a sad and wistful smile on her lips, "know little of yours, but I find myself wanting to." Beatrice, her dance card full, found herself swept from one partner to another, a whirlwind of polite smiles and empty compliments. Her heart, however, was not in the dance. It was with James, who moved through the ballroom with a quiet and unobtrusive grace, his silver tray a shield against the glittering and superficial world that surrounded them. When the orchestra began to play a particularly romantic waltz, she found herself standing near the library, the door slightly ajar. She slipped inside, the strains of the waltz a faint and romantic echo in the silence of the book-lined room. James was there, a single candle illuminating his face as he replaced a fallen book on a high shelf. "Forgive me," she said, her voice a breathless whisper. I needed a moment of quiet." He turned to her, a look of surprise and concern on his face. "Are you unwell, Miss Beatrice?" he asked, his voice filled with a genuine and heartfelt warmth. "No," she said, a shy and hesitant smile on her lips. I am simply weary of the noise." She looked at him, her heart in her eyes. "I would rather be here, in the company of books and you." Cordelia, her rebellious spirit chafing at the confines of the formal ball, found herself engaged in a lively and flirtatious conversation with a dashing and arrogant young man from a neighboring plantation. He was considered to be the most eligible bachelor in all of Georgia, but to Cordelia he was a bore, his conversation a tedious and self-aggrandizing monologue. When he, with a confident and proprietary air, asked for a second dance, she laughed, a musical and defiant sound that turned several heads in their direction. "I am afraid, sir," she said, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes, "that I have promised the next dance to another." She turned and, with a grace and audacity that stunned the assembled guests, walked over to Thomas, who was standing by the punch bowl, his face a mixture of astonishment and admiration. "I believe," she said, her voice a clear and ringing challenge, "that you owe me a dance." A hush fell over the ballroom. The music faltered, the conversations died down, and all eyes were on the audacious Devereaux triplet and the handsome, sun-bronzed gardener. Thomas, after a moment of stunned silence, a slow and brilliant smile spread across his face. He took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her, and led her to the center of the dance floor. The orchestra, after a moment of hesitation, began to play again, a slow and romantic waltz that seemed to have been written just for them. The Midsummer Night's Ball, a night that was meant to be a celebration of order and propriety, had become a night of quiet and open rebellion. The Devereaux triplets, each in their own way, had crossed a line, a dangerous and invisible boundary that separated their world from the world of the men they loved. The consequences of their actions, they knew, would be swift and severe. But in the intoxicating and liberating moments of their stolen encounters, they had tasted a freedom that was more precious than any of their family's wealth or social standing. The seeds of their secret loves, sown in the fertile ground of their discontent, had blossomed into a beautiful and dangerous flower, and its fragrant and intoxicating scent was about to permeate every corner of the Devereaux mansion. The morning after the Midsummer Night's Ball dawned gray and oppressive, the sky a bruised and sullen purple, the air thick with the promise of a storm. The atmosphere inside the Devereaux mansion was just as charged, the silence a heavy and suffocating blanket. Mrs. Arabella Devereaux, her face a mask of cold and controlled fury, had summoned her daughters to the morning room, the very room where, just a few weeks ago, they had sat with their embroidery, their lives a placid and untroubled stream. Today, however, the room felt like a courtroom, and they, the accused, stood before their mother, the judge, jury, and executioner. "I am disappointed," Mrs. Devereaux began, her voice a low and dangerous purr. "Disappointed and bewildered. The behavior of the three of you last night was not just a breach of etiquette. It was a public and humiliating spectacle. Eleanor skulking on the veranda with a stable hand, Beatrice hiding in the library with a footman, and Cordelia." She paused, her eyes like chips of ice, fixing on her youngest daughter. "Cordelia dancing in the middle of my ballroom with a gardener." The triplets stood in silence, their heads bowed, their hands clasped before them. They had known this moment was coming, had anticipated their mother's wrath. But the reality of it was far more terrifying than they could have imagined. Their mother, for all her outward charm and grace, possessed a will of iron and a tongue as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "Have you nothing to say for yourselves?" she demanded, her voice rising with each word. "Have you no explanation for this madness?" It was Cordelia, the firebrand, who found her voice first. "It was not madness, Mother," she said, her head held high, her eyes meeting her mother's with a look of defiance that was both courageous and foolish. "It was a moment of honesty, a moment of truth." Mrs. Devereaux laughed, a harsh and mirthless sound that echoed in the silent room. "Truth?" she sneered. "And what truth is that, Cordelia? The truth that you have no respect for your family name? The truth that you are willing to throw away your future, your reputation, your very life, for a fleeting and inappropriate fancy?" "It is not a fancy," Beatrice whispered, her voice a fragile and trembling thread. It is love." The words, spoken so softly, seemed to hang in the air, a beautiful and dangerous thing. Mrs. Devereaux stared at her daughter as if she had just uttered a profanity. "Love?" she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "You know nothing of love. You are children, living in a world of romantic and foolish notions. Love is a luxury that people of our station cannot afford. Marriage is a business transaction, a means to an end. It is about securing one's future, about preserving one's legacy. It has nothing to do with the fleeting and unreliable emotions of the heart." "But what if it could be both?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the storm that was raging inside her. "What if it could be possible to have a marriage that is both advantageous and loving?" Mrs. Devereaux rose from her chair, her movement slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "You are not hearing me," she said, her voice a low and menacing hiss. "You are not understanding the gravity of your situation. You have not just embarrassed me, you have endangered us all. The rumors are already spreading like wildfire through the city. The Devereaux triplets, the darlings of Savannah, consorting with servants. Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation? To your prospects of a suitable marriage?" She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of her daughters, a look of cold and calculating fury in their depths. This will end," she said, her voice a final and irrevocable decree. "It will end now. The three men, they will be dismissed. They will be sent away, where they can do no more harm." The triplets gasped, a collective sound of shock and despair. "No, Mother, please," Beatrice pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You cannot. It is not their fault. It is ours." "Their fault lies in their presumption," Mrs. Devereaux said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "In their audacity to forget their place. They will be dealt with. And you," she said, her gaze sweeping over her daughters, a look of cold and unyielding resolve in her eyes, "will learn your lesson. You will be confined to this house until you have come to your senses. You will have no visitors, no correspondence, no contact with the outside world. You will have time to reflect on your folly, on the damage you have done. And you will, I assure you, come to see the wisdom of my decision." The storm that had been gathering outside had finally broken. The rain lashed against the windows, the thunder rolled, and the lightning lit up the sky, a dramatic and fitting backdrop to the tempest that had just been unleashed within the walls of the Devereaux mansion. The triplets, their hopes and dreams shattered, stood in stunned silence, their hearts breaking with a pain that was as sharp and as searing as the lightning that ripped through the stormy sky. The battle lines had been drawn, and the Devereaux mansion, once a symbol of their gilded and privileged lives, had become a prison. The days that followed the Midsummer Night's Ball were a blur of suffocating silence and a leaden-hearted despair. The Devereaux mansion, once a place of light and life, had become a tomb, its opulent rooms filled with the ghosts of their shattered dreams. Mrs. Devereaux, true to her word, had transformed their home into a gilded cage, a beautiful and luxurious prison from which there was no escape. The heavy velvet curtains were kept drawn, shutting out the world. The iron gates were locked, and a new and stern-faced housekeeper, a woman with eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky, had been hired to watch their every move. Samuel, James, and Thomas were gone. They had been dismissed without a word of explanation, their absence a gaping and painful wound in the hearts of the triplets. There had been no chance for a final glance, a whispered goodbye, a last lingering touch. They had simply vanished, as if they had never existed, their presence erased from the Devereaux household as easily as a chalk mark on a slate. The silence they left behind was a deafening roar in the ears of the three sisters, a constant and agonizing reminder of what they had lost. Eleanor, her pragmatic nature a fragile shield against the onslaught of her grief, retreated into a world of stoic and silent sorrow. She spent her days in the morning room, her embroidery hoop lying untouched in her lap, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window that overlooked the now empty stables. She imagined Samuel there, his gentle hands calming a restless horse, his quiet strength a comforting and reassuring presence. The memory of their brief and stolen conversation on the veranda was a precious and painful treasure, a single, perfect pearl in the vast and empty ocean of her despair. She did not weep, for tears, she believed, were a sign of weakness. But her heart was a leaden weight in her chest, a constant and heavy ache that seemed to steal the very breath from her lungs. Beatrice, her romantic soul crushed by the harsh and unforgiving reality of their situation, sought solace in the world of books. The library, once a place of secret and joyful encounters, had become a mausoleum, its shelves filled with the silent and unseeing witnesses to her broken heart. She would sit for hours in the darkened room, a volume of poetry resting unread in her lap, her tears staining the delicate and gilded pages. She reread the passages that she and James had shared, his faint pencil marks a ghostly and heartbreaking reminder of their intellectual and emotional connection. The world of literature, once a source of comfort and escape, had become a cruel and constant reminder of the love story that had been so brutally and abruptly ended. Cordelia, her fiery spirit unaccustomed to defeat, raged against the injustice of their confinement. She paced the length of her room like a caged tigress, her hands clenched into fists, her heart a burning coal of anger and frustration. She hated her mother for her cruelty, she hated the world for its rigid and unforgiving rules, and she hated herself for her powerlessness. She would stand at her window, her gaze fixed on the garden, now a wild and overgrown tangle of weeds, a sad and neglected testament to the absence of the man who had brought it to life. The memory of her dance with Thomas, a moment of exhilarating and defiant freedom, was a bitter and painful irony, a fleeting and tantalizing taste of a life that she was now forbidden to live. The sisters, once so close, so united in their shared secret, were now isolated in their individual prisons of grief. The silence that had fallen between them was a heavy and impenetrable wall, their shared sorrow a burden too great to be spoken aloud. They were like three beautiful and broken dolls, their porcelain faces etched with a sadness that was as deep and as timeless as the river that flowed through the heart of Savannah. Mrs. Devereaux, her victory a cold and bitter triumph, moved through the silent house like a ghost, her face a mask of serene and unyielding resolve. She believed that she had done what was necessary, that she had saved her daughters from their own foolish and destructive impulses. She did not see the desolation in their eyes. She did not hear the silent screams of their breaking hearts. She saw only their obedience, their submission, their return to the path of propriety and reason. She had won the battle, she believed, but she had lost the war. For in her ruthless and unwavering determination to protect the Devereux name, she had shattered the very things that made it worth preserving: the love, the trust, and the happiness of her own daughters. The gilded cage she had built for them was a beautiful and secure one, but it was a cage nonetheless, and the spirits of the 3 young women who were trapped inside it were slowly and inexorably beginning to die. Weeks turned into a month, and the oppressive silence of the Devereux mansion remained unbroken. The triplets, trapped in their gilded cage, had sunk into a state of listless and apathetic despair. The fire in Cordelia's eyes had dimmed to a faint and flickering ember. The light in Beatrice's had been extinguished, and the quiet strength that had once defined Eleanor had been replaced by a fragile and heartbreaking vulnerability. They were ghosts in their own home, their days a monotonous and soul-crushing cycle of empty rituals and unspoken sorrow. It was during this time of profound and suffocating darkness that a faint and distant echo of their lost loves began to penetrate the thick and impenetrable walls of their prison. It was a subtle and almost imperceptible shift, a series of small and seemingly insignificant events that, to the hopeful and desperate hearts of the 3 sisters, were signs, omens, whispers from the world that had been so cruelly and abruptly taken from them. The first sign came to Eleanor. One morning, as she sat by her window, her gaze fixed on the empty and desolate stables, she saw a young boy, a street urchin with a grimy face and a mischievous glint in his eyes, dart across the courtyard and leave a small, smooth stone on the windowsill of her room. It was a stone just like the one Samuel used to leave for her, a silent and humble token of his affection. Her heart, which she had thought to be irrevocably broken, gave a sudden and painful lurch. She rushed to the window and looked out, but the boy was gone, vanished as quickly and as mysteriously as he had appeared. She picked up the stone, its smooth and cool surface a comforting and familiar presence in her hand, and for the first time in weeks, a single, solitary tear traced a path down her pale and sunken cheek. The second sign came to Beatrice. A new delivery boy had been hired to bring the groceries to the Devereux mansion, a lanky and awkward youth who seemed to be perpetually tripping over his own feet. One afternoon, as he was unloading a crate of books that had been ordered for Mr. Devereux, a single slim volume fell from the top of the pile and landed at Beatrice's feet. It was a collection of poems by a little-known author, a book she had once discussed with James, a book he had promised to find for her. The delivery boy, his face a mask of fumbling and apologetic embarrassment, quickly retrieved the book and placed it back on the pile. But as he did so, he gave her a quick and meaningful look, a look that seemed to say, "This is for you. This is from him." The third sign came to Cordelia. The garden, once a source of such joy and beauty, had become a sad and neglected wilderness. The roses were drooping, the weeds were choking the delicate flowers, and the paths were overgrown with a tangle of vines. One morning, as she stood on the veranda, her heart aching at the sight of the desolation below, she noticed a single, perfect white rose blooming in the midst of the chaos. It was a rose of the same variety that Thomas had once left for her on the stone bench by the fountain, a silent and eloquent declaration of his love. It was a small and seemingly insignificant thing, a single bloom in a sea of neglect, but to Cordelia, it was a symbol of hope, a testament to the enduring and resilient power of life and love. These faint and distant echoes of their lost loves were like a cool and refreshing rain on the parched and barren landscape of the triplets' despair. They were whispers of hope in the suffocating silence of their gilded cage, a reminder that they had not been forgotten, that the men they loved were still out there, somewhere, thinking of them, reaching out to them in their own silent and secret ways. The sisters, who had been drifting apart in their individual seas of sorrow, were now drawn back together by this shared and fragile hope. They met in their sitting room, the room that had once been their sanctuary and had then become a symbol of their shared grief. And for the first time in weeks, they spoke. They spoke of the stone, of the book, of the rose. They spoke of the possibility, however faint and distant, that their story was not yet over. The faint and distant echo had become a symphony of hope, a quiet and powerful melody that was beginning to drown out the discordant and soul-crushing music of their despair. The fire in Cordelia's eyes was reignited. The light in Beatrice's began to flicker back to life, and the quiet strength that had once defined Eleanor began to return. The Devereaux triplets, who had been on the verge of surrendering to their fate, were now filled with a new and unwavering resolve. They would not be broken. They would not be defeated. They would find a way, they vowed, to break free from their gilded cage and to reclaim the love and the life that had been so cruelly and unjustly taken from them. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a single, beautiful, and resilient flower of hope had begun to bloom. The newfound hope that had taken root in the hearts of the Devereaux triplets was a fragile and delicate thing, a single candle flickering in the vast and oppressive darkness of their confinement. They knew that hope alone was not enough. They needed a plan, a strategy, a way to turn their passive and desperate yearning into active and decisive rebellion. They needed an ally, someone on the inside, someone who could help them to bridge the chasm that separated them from the world and from the men they loved. And they found that ally in the most unlikely of places. Mrs. Higgins, the new housekeeper, was a woman who seemed to have been carved from a block of granite. She was stern, efficient, and seemingly devoid of any human emotion. She moved through the Devereaux mansion with a quiet and unobtrusive authority, her cold, gray eyes missing nothing. The triplets, at first, saw her as just another one of their mother's spies, another guardian of their gilded cage. But as the days turned into weeks, they began to notice a subtle and almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor. They saw it in the way she would leave an extra blanket at the foot of Beatrice's bed on a particularly cold night, in the way she would bring Eleanor a cup of chamomile tea when she was suffering from one of her debilitating headaches, in the way she would turn a blind eye when Cordelia would sneak a piece of forbidden chocolate from the kitchen pantry. They were small and seemingly insignificant gestures, but in the bleak and loveless landscape of their lives, they were like tiny, brilliant stars in a moonless sky. The turning point came one afternoon when Mrs. Higgins found Beatrice in the library, weeping over a volume of poetry. The housekeeper, her face a mask of her usual stoic and unreadable expression, stood in silence for a moment, and then, in a voice that was surprisingly gentle, she said, "He was a good man, Miss Beatrice. A kind and gentle soul. He did not deserve his fate." Beatrice looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. You knew him?" she stammered. Mrs. Higgins nodded. "I knew them all," she said, her voice a low and quiet murmur. "And I know what was done to them. And to you. It was an injustice." And then, in a rush of words that seemed to break through a dam of long-suppressed emotion, she told them her own story. She spoke of a love she had once had, a love for a man who was considered to be beneath her station, a love that had been brutally and ruthlessly crushed by her own ambitious and unforgiving family. She spoke of a life of regret, of a heart that had been broken and had never fully healed. "I see myself in you," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "and I will not stand by and watch you suffer the same fate." From that day on, Mrs. Higgins became their secret and invaluable ally. She was their messenger, their confidant, their lifeline to the outside world. She would smuggle letters out of the mansion, letters filled with words of love and longing, of hope and despair. And she would bring back letters in return, letters that were written on cheap, rough paper, but were filled with a passion and a poetry that put the works of the great masters to shame. She was the one who arranged for the stone to be left on Eleanor's windowsill, for the book to be delivered to Beatrice, for the rose to be planted in the neglected garden. She was the one who kept the flame of their hope alive, who nurtured the fragile and beautiful flower of their forbidden loves. The alliance between the Devereaux triplets and the stern-faced housekeeper was a dangerous and audacious one. They were all risking everything, their positions, their reputations, their very lives. But they were united in their shared and unwavering belief in the power of love, in their shared and unyielding determination to fight for a world where the heart was not bound by the cold and unforgiving chains of social convention. The gilded cage, once so secure and impenetrable, now had a crack in its beautiful and deceptive facade. And through that crack, a ray of light, a ray of hope, a ray of rebellion was beginning to shine. The unlikeliest of allies had joined forces, and the Devereaux mansion, for so long a symbol of oppression and despair, was about to become the headquarters of a quiet and courageous revolution. The clandestine correspondence, facilitated by the courageous and resourceful Mrs. Higgins, was a lifeline to the Triplets, a precious and intoxicating connection to the men who held their hearts. But letters, they soon realized, were not enough. They were a poor substitute for the warmth of a touch, the sound of a voice, the look in a pair of loving eyes. The desire to see their beloveds, to be in their presence, became an all-consuming and dangerous obsession. And so, with the help of their unlikely ally, they began to weave a dangerous and intricate web of deception, a plan that was as audacious as it was perilous. The plan, conceived in the hushed whispers of their shared sitting room, was a simple one in its essence, but a complex and a terrifying one in its execution. They would feign a sudden and debilitating illness, a mysterious and contagious malady that would require them to be quarantined in their rooms, away from the prying eyes of their mother and the rest of the household staff. Mrs. Higgins, with her knowledge of herbs and her experience as a nurse, would be the one to diagnose their illness and to insist on the strict and unwavering quarantine. She would be their guardian, their nurse, their accomplice. The first to fall ill was Beatrice, her delicate and sensitive nature making her the most believable victim of a mysterious and debilitating ailment. She took to her bed, her face pale and her eyes listless, her performance so convincing that even the skeptical Mrs. Devereaux was forced to concede to the housekeeper's diagnosis. The quarantine was put into effect, and Beatrice, for the first time in months, was alone, a prisoner in her own room, but a prisoner who was about to be granted a brief and precious taste of freedom. That night, under the cloak of darkness, Mrs. Higgins led James up the back stairs, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He slipped into Beatrice's room, the door closing behind him with a soft and almost inaudible click. The sight of her, so pale and fragile in the soft moonlight that filtered through the window, made his heart ache with a love that was as painful as it was profound. He knelt by her bed, his hand reaching for hers, his touch a gentle and reassuring caress. "Beatrice," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "My love." She opened her eyes, a slow and brilliant smile spreading across her face. "James," she breathed, her voice a soft and incredulous whisper. "You are here." They spoke in hushed tones, their words a torrent of pent-up emotion, a symphony of love and longing, of hope and despair. He told her of his life since he had been dismissed, of the menial and soul-crushing jobs he had taken to survive, of the constant and gnawing ache of her absence. She told him of her gilded cage, of the suffocating silence of her days, of the faint and distant echoes of his love that had kept her from surrendering to despair. They were two souls, separated by a cruel and unforgiving world, who had found their way back to each other, if only for a few stolen and precious hours. The next to succumb to the mysterious illness was Cordelia. Her feigned malady was a more dramatic and a fiery one, a fever that left her flushed and restless, her performance so convincing that it sent a ripple of genuine alarm through the household. The quarantine was extended, and Cordelia, her heart a wild and untamed bird in her chest, waited for the cover of darkness and the arrival of the man who was her kindred spirit. Thomas, his hands, usually so steady and sure, now trembling with a nervous excitement, followed Mrs. Higgins up the back stairs and into the darkened room where Cordelia lay in wait. The sight of her, her hair a wild and beautiful halo on the pillow, her eyes shining with a mixture of defiance and desire, took his breath away. He was a simple man, a man of the earth, and he was in love with a woman who was as beautiful and as unattainable as the stars. "Cordelia," he said, his voice a low and reverent whisper, "you are a vision." She laughed, a soft and musical sound that filled the silent room. "And you, Thomas," she said, her voice a playful and seductive purr, "are a sight for sore eyes." Their reunion was a more passionate and a more boisterous one, a celebration of their shared and untamed spirits. They spoke of the garden, of the flowers, of the wild and beautiful things of the earth. He told her of his dream to one day own his own piece of land, to create a garden that would be a testament to the enduring and resilient power of life. She told him of her dream to one day be free, to ride a horse across an open field, to feel the wind in her hair and the sun on her skin. They were two rebels, two dreamers, who had found in each other a kindred and a courageous soul. The last to fall ill was Eleanor, her feigned illness a more subtle and a more dignified one, a quiet and persistent cough that left her weak and listless. The quarantine by now was an accepted and unquestioned fact of life in the Devereaux mansion. And Eleanor, her heart aflutter with a nervous and a hopeful anticipation, waited for the man whose quiet strength had captured her heart. Samuel, his face a mask of his usual stoic and unreadable expression, but his eyes betraying the storm of emotion that was raging inside him, followed Mrs. Higgins up the back stairs and into the room where Eleanor lay, her face pale and her eyes shining with a love that was as deep and as unwavering as her own. He was a man of few words, a man whose emotions ran deep and silent, but the look in his eyes as he gazed upon her was a poem, a symphony, a declaration of love that was more eloquent than any words could ever be. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low and gentle rumble, "I have missed you." She smiled, a sad and a beautiful smile that lit up her pale and tired face. "And I you, Samuel," she said, her voice a soft and a heartfelt whisper. More than words can say. Their reunion was a quiet and a poignant one, a meeting of two souls who had found in each other a sense of peace and of belonging. He told her of his plans to one day leave Savannah, to go west, to build a life for himself on the vast and open frontier. He spoke of a life of hard work and of simple pleasures, a life of freedom and of dignity. And as she listened to him, her heart filled with a love and an admiration that was as vast and as boundless as the frontier he spoke of, she knew, with a certainty that was as clear and as bright as the morning star, that she wanted to be a part of that life. The weaving of the dangerous web had been a success. The triplets had been reunited with their loves, if only for a few stolen and precious moments. But they knew that their deception could not last forever. Their mother, for all her self-absorption, was not a fool. The housekeeper, for all her courage, was not invincible. The gilded cage, for all its apparent security, was a fragile and a precarious one. The time for secret meetings and for stolen moments was coming to an end. The time for a final and a decisive act of rebellion, they knew, was fast approaching. Mrs. Arabella Devereaux was not a woman to be trifled with. She was a keen observer of human nature, a master of the subtle and unspoken currents of emotion that flowed through her household. And though she had been initially deceived by the triplets' feigned illness, a seed of suspicion had taken root in her sharp and calculating mind. It was a small and a nagging doubt at first, a series of seemingly insignificant inconsistencies that, when pieced together, began to form a disturbing and an undeniable picture. She noticed the way Mrs. Higgins, for all her stern and professional demeanor, would look at the triplets with a softness, a complicity, that was both puzzling and alarming. She noticed the way the scent of the night-blooming jasmine, a scent she had always associated with the gardener, would linger in Cordelia's room long after the sun had risen. She noticed the way a single pressed flower, a flower that did not come from her own garden, would mysteriously appear in the pages of the book Beatrice was reading. And she noticed the way a small, smooth stone, a stone that could only have come from the riverbed, would be resting on Eleanor's windowsill, a silent and a damning piece of evidence. The final and irrefutable proof of her daughter's deception came one night when she was awakened by a sound, a soft and a muffled sound coming from the hallway. She slipped out of her bed, her heart a cold and a heavy stone in her chest, and crept to the door of her room. She opened it a crack and peered out into the darkened hallway. And there, in the faint and a flickering light of a single candle, she saw him, the footman, James. He was tiptoeing down the back stairs, a look of both rapture and of fear on his face. The truth in all its ugly and a devastating clarity hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her daughters had not just been corresponding with the dismissed servants, they had been meeting with them. Here, in her own home, under her very nose. The audacity, the deceit, the sheer unmitigated gall of it took her breath away. The next morning, she did not summon her daughters to the morning room. She did not rage, she did not scream, she did not resort to the histrionics of a lesser woman. She was a Devereaux, and a Devereaux, even in the face of the most profound and a humiliating betrayal, maintained her composure. She waited until her husband had left for his office, and then, with a calm and a chilling deliberation, she went to her daughter's rooms. She found Beatrice first, a look of serene and a blissful contentment on her face. "The quarantine, my dear Beatrice," she said, her voice a soft and a silken threat, "is over." She then went to Cordelia's room, and then to Eleanor's. Her message the same, her tone as cold and as sharp as a shard of ice. The triplets, their faces a mixture of shock and of terror, knew that their game was up. The web of deception they had so carefully and so bravely woven had been torn asunder. Mrs. Devereaux then summoned Mrs. Higgins to the library. The housekeeper, her face a pale and a grim mask, stood before her employer, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture as straight and as unyielding as a soldier's. "You have betrayed my trust," Mrs. Devereaux said, her voice a low and a dangerous hiss. "You have aided and abetted my daughters in their folly, in their degradation. You will pack your things, and you will be gone from this house within the hour. You are fortunate that I do not have you arrested for your part in this conspiracy." Mrs. Higgins did not flinch. She looked Mrs. Devereaux directly in the eye, a look of both pity and of scorn in their depths. "You are a fool, Mrs. Devereaux," she said, her voice a quiet and a powerful indictment. "You have a fortune, you have a name, you have a position in this world that most people can only dream of. But you have a heart that is as cold and as empty as this room. You do not know the meaning of love, and so you seek to destroy it in others. You have not saved your daughters. You have destroyed them. And you will, I assure you, live to regret this day." And with that she turned and walked out of the room, her head held high, a woman of courage and of conviction, a woman who had chosen love over fear, a woman who had, in the end, won a far greater victory than the one that Mrs. Devereaux had just so ruthlessly and so short-sightedly claimed. The inescapable truth had been revealed, and the Devereaux mansion, for so long a place of secrets and of lies, was now a place of cold and of brutal honesty. The final battle was about to be waged, and the fate of the Devereaux triplets, and of the men they loved, hung in the balance. The atmosphere in the Devereaux mansion in the days following the discovery of the triplets' deception was a cold and a suffocating one. Mrs. Devereaux, her face a mask of icy and unyielding fury, had tightened her grip on her daughters, her control now absolute and unwavering. The gilded cage had become a fortress, its walls impenetrable, its guards ever vigilant. The triplets were prisoners in their own home, their every move monitored, their every word scrutinized. All hope, it seemed, was lost. But in the darkest hour, when despair threatened to consume them, a spark of rebellion was reignited. It was a desperate and a daring plan, a plan born of love and of courage, a plan that would either lead them to freedom or to their utter and a complete ruin. The plan was communicated to them in the most unlikely and a surreptitious of ways. A new laundress had been hired to replace the one who had been dismissed along with the other servants. She was a young and a spirited woman, with a mischievous glint in her eyes and a smile that was as bright and as warm as the Georgia sun. Her name was Sarah, and she was, the triplets soon discovered, a cousin of Mrs. Higgins. One afternoon, as Sarah was collecting the soiled linen from their rooms, she slipped a small folded piece of paper into Eleanor's hand. It was a letter from Mrs. Higgins, a letter that was filled with words of encouragement and of hope, a letter that outlined a plan for their escape. The plan was a simple one in its concept, but a complex and a dangerous one in its execution. There was to be a masquerade ball at the home of a wealthy and an influential shipping magnate, a man who was a close and a trusted friend of the Devereaux family. The triplets, of course, were expected to attend. It was to be their first public appearance since the Midsummer Night's Ball, a carefully orchestrated re-entry into Savannah society, a public and a symbolic declaration that the scandal that had threatened to engulf the Devereaux name had been successfully and ruthlessly suppressed. The plan was this: the triplets would attend the ball, but they would not return. Under the cover of the masks and the costumes, the chaos and the confusion of the crowded and a boisterous ball, they would slip away. A carriage would be waiting for them at a pre-arranged location, a carriage that would take them to a small and a secluded church on the outskirts of the city. There, Samuel, James, and Thomas would be waiting for them. A sympathetic and a courageous preacher, a man who believed that the laws of God were higher than the laws of men, had agreed to marry them. From there, they would flee Savannah. They would flee the South. They would flee to a new life, a life of freedom and of love, in the vast and the promising lands of the West. The risks were enormous. If they were caught, the consequences would be dire. They would be disowned, disgraced, and perhaps even institutionalized for their madness. The men they loved would be arrested, charged with abduction, and would undoubtedly face a far more brutal and a permanent fate. But the alternative, a life of loveless and a suffocating servitude, was a fate that was, to the triplets, far worse than death. And so, with a mixture of terror and of exhilaration, they agreed to the plan. They sent a message back to Mrs. Higgins through Sarah, a single coded word that confirmed their participation in the desperate and the daring escape. The days leading up to the masquerade ball were a strange and a surreal dream. The triplets moved through their lives with a calm and a detached precision, their faces a mask of serene and a submissive obedience. They allowed their mother to choose their costumes, to dictate their every move, to believe that she had finally and completely broken their rebellious spirits. But beneath their masks of docility, their hearts were aflutter with a nervous and a hopeful anticipation. They were actresses in the final and the most important performance of their lives, and the stakes could not have been higher. The night of the masquerade ball arrived, a warm and a starless night, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and of revolution. The triplets, dressed as the three Graces, their faces hidden behind identical feathered masks, descended the grand staircase of their home for what they prayed would be the last time. Mrs. Devereaux, a proud and a triumphant smile on her face, looked at her beautiful and her obedient daughters, and for the first time in a long and a bitter while, she allowed herself to feel a sense of satisfaction, a sense of victory. She was a fool, a blind and a self-absorbed fool, and her victory, she was about to discover, was a hollow and a fleeting one. The final act of the drama was about to unfold, and the Devereaux mansion, the symbol of her power and of her control, was about to become the stage for her ultimate and her humiliating defeat. The ballroom of the shipping magnate's mansion was a kaleidoscope of color and of sound, a swirling and a chaotic vortex of masked and a costumed figures. The air was thick with the scent of champagne and of intrigue, the music a loud and a boisterous cacophony that drowned out the hushed whispers and the secret assignations that were taking place in the shadowed corners of the room. It was the perfect stage for the grand deception that was about to unfold. The Devereaux triplets, their hearts pounding in their chests, moved through the crowded ballroom with a grace and a poise that belied the terror and the exhilaration that was coursing through their veins. They played their parts to perfection, their laughter light and their conversation witty, their masks a shield against the prying and the curious eyes of Savannah society. Mrs. Devereaux, preening and a self-satisfied, watched her daughters from across the room, a proud and a proprietary smile on her face. She was oblivious to the drama that was about to erupt, to the fact that she was about to become the victim of the most audacious and a humiliating deception of her life. The signal was a prearranged one. At the stroke of midnight, when the orchestra would begin to play the final waltz of the evening, the triplets would make their move. The minutes leading up to the witching hour were an agony of suspense, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall a hammer blow on their taut and afraid nerves. And then it came. The clock began to strike, its chimes a deep and a sonorous countdown to their freedom. The orchestra, as if on cue, began to play a slow and a romantic waltz, its melody a sweet and a poignant farewell to the life they were about to leave behind. It was Cordelia, the most daring of the three, who made the first move. She was engaged in a flirtatious and a meaningless conversation with a young man dressed as a pirate, his mask doing little to conceal his arrogant and a self-satisfied smirk. With a sudden and a dramatic flare, she pretended to faint, her body collapsing into the arms of the startled and a flustered pirate. A murmur of alarm rippled through the crowd, and all eyes were on the beautiful and the distressed damsel. In the ensuing chaos, Eleanor and Beatrice slipped away, their movements swift and silent, their identical costumes a perfect and a confusing camouflage. They moved through the crowded ballroom like ghosts, their hearts in their throats, their eyes fixed on the open French doors that led to the garden. They reached the doors, their hands trembling, their breath coming in short and shallow gasps. They were almost there. Mrs. Devereaux, her face a mask of concern and of annoyance, pushed her way through the crowd that had gathered around Cordelia. She knelt by her daughter's side, her hand on her forehead, her mind already calculating the social damage that this latest and a most inconvenient drama would cause. Cordelia, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, her performance a masterpiece of dramatic and a convincing artistry, allowed herself a small and a triumphant smile. Her mother, for all her cunning and her control, was a fool, a blind and a self-absorbed fool. And then, just as Eleanor and Beatrice were about to step out into the cool and the liberating darkness of the garden, a hand reached out and grabbed Eleanor's arm. It was her father. He had been standing in the shadows, his face a grim and a knowing mask. "And where do you think you are going?" he asked, his voice a low and a dangerous growl. The grand deception had been discovered. The carefully and a brilliantly executed plan had been thwarted at the very last moment. The triplets, their hopes and their dreams shattered, were trapped. The gilded cage, it seemed, was not so easy to escape after all. The moment stretched into an eternity, the joyous and a boisterous sounds of the masquerade ball a distant and a mocking echo to the silent and a tense drama that was unfolding in the shadowed alcove by the French doors. Eleanor's heart, which had been soaring with the hope of freedom, plummeted to the depths of despair. Her father's grip on her arm was like a manacle, his eyes, dark and piercing, a mirror of the fury and the betrayal that was surely raging in his soul. Beatrice, her face a pale and a terrified mask, stood frozen by her sister's side, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and of terror. Their grand deception had failed. They were caught. But then, something unexpected, something miraculous, happened. Mr. Devereaux, his face a grim and an unreadable mask, did not drag his daughters back into the ballroom. He did not raise his voice. He did not create a scene. He simply stood there, his grip on Eleanor's arm unwavering, his eyes searching her face, as if he were seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. And in that moment, Eleanor saw something in her father's eyes that she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not disappointment. It was sadness, a deep and a profound sadness. And in that sadness, she saw a flicker of something else, something she could not quite name. It was understanding, and in that understanding she saw a glimmer of hope. "Father," she whispered, her voice a fragile and a pleading thread. "Please." He looked at her, and then at Beatrice, his gaze softening, his grip on her arm loosening. And then, in a voice that was so low that she could barely hear it over the sound of the music and of her own pounding heart, he said, "Your mother, she is a strong and a formidable woman, but she is also a product of her time, of her world, a world that values appearances above all else, a world that has forgotten how to love." He paused, his eyes filling with a sadness that seemed to come from a place of deep and a personal pain. I have not been the father that I should have been," he confessed, his voice thick with a regret that was as palpable as the humid Georgia air. "I have been a coward. I have allowed your mother to rule this family, to rule your lives, with an iron and an unfeeling hand. I have stood by and watched as the light in your eyes has been extinguished, as the joy in your hearts has been crushed, and I can stand by no longer." He released his grip on her arm, his hand falling to his side. "Go," he said, his voice a firm and a resolute command. "Go now, before it is too late." Eleanor and Beatrice stared at him, their faces a mixture of astonishment and of disbelief. But father," Beatrice stammered, "what about you? What about mother?" A sad and a weary smile touched his lips. I will deal with your mother," he said, his voice a quiet and an unwavering promise. "It is a battle that is long overdue. Go, find your happiness, live your lives, be free." And with that, he turned and walked back into the ballroom, a man who had, in a single and a courageous moment, redeemed a lifetime of passivity and of cowardice. He had made a choice, a father's choice, a choice to sacrifice his own peace, his own comfort, his own future, for the happiness and the freedom of his daughters. Eleanor and Beatrice, their hearts overflowing with a love and a gratitude that was as deep and as boundless as the ocean, did not hesitate. They slipped out into the garden, the cool night air a sweet and a liberating caress on their skin. They found Cordelia, who had, in a moment of brilliant and quick-thinking improvisation, recovered from her fainting spell and had made her own escape. The three sisters, reunited and irresolute, ran through the darkened garden, their laughter a soft and a joyous sound in the still night air. The carriage was waiting for them, just as Mrs. Higgins had promised. They scrambled inside, their hearts soaring, their spirits free. The carriage lurched forward, its wheels a triumphant and a rumbling drumbeat on the cobblestone streets of Savannah. They were on their way. They were on their way to a new life, a new beginning, a new world. The gilded cage was behind them, and before them, the vast and the promising horizon of a future that they would, for the first time in their lives, be able to write for themselves. The small secluded church on the outskirts of Savannah was a humble and a simple structure, its whitewashed walls bathed in the soft and a silvery light of the moon. It was a world away from the opulent and a soulless grandeur of the Devereux mansion, a sanctuary of peace and of sincerity in a world of artifice and of hypocrisy. It was here, in this quiet and a sacred space, that the Georgia Triplets were about to seal their destiny. They entered the church, their hearts aflutter with a nervous and a joyful anticipation, and there, at the altar, bathed in the warm and a gentle glow of a single candle, were the three men who held their hearts. Samuel, his quiet strength a comforting and a reassuring presence, James, his poetic soul shining in his eyes, and Thomas, his untamed spirit a perfect and a beautiful match for Cordelia's own. The reunion was a joyous and a tearful one, a torrent of pent-up emotion, a symphony of love and of longing, of relief and of gratitude. The preacher, a kind and a courageous man with a face as weathered and as gentle as the pages of his well-worn Bible, smiled at the four couples, a look of both admiration and of affection in his eyes. "We are gathered here tonight," he began, his voice a low and a resonant rumble, "not just to join these four couples in holy matrimony, but to bear witness to a testament of the enduring and the triumphant power of love. A love that has defied the odds, a love that has broken the chains of prejudice and of fear, a love that has, in the end, conquered all." And so, in the quiet and a sacred intimacy of the humble country church, the Georgia Triplets and the men they loved were joined in a union that was forged not in wealth or in status, but in courage and in love. The words of the ancient and a sacred ceremony were a beautiful and a poignant soundtrack to the culmination of their long and their arduous journey. Eleanor and Samuel, their hands clasped, their eyes locked, their love a deep and a quiet river that ran silent and assured. Beatrice and James, their souls intertwined, their hearts beating as one, their love a beautiful and a timeless poem. Cordelia and Thomas, their spirits united, their laughter a joyous and a defiant song, their love a wild and a beautiful flame. And in a quiet and an unexpected corner of the small church, another couple stood, their hands clasped, their eyes shining with a love that had been rekindled in the fires of their shared and a courageous rebellion. Mrs. Higgins, her face softened by a love that had been long denied, and Mr. Devereux, his face etched with a peace and a contentment that had been a stranger to him for far too long. They had found their own second chance, their own new beginning, in the courageous and a selfless act of helping their children to find theirs. As the sun began to rise, casting a rosy and a hopeful glow on the horizon, the four couples emerged from the church, their faces illuminated by the dawn of a new day and of a new life. They were no longer the Devereux Triplets, the jewels of Savannah society, and the humble servants who had served them. They were simply free. Free to love, free to live, free to be who they were always meant to be. They climbed into the waiting carriages, their hearts full, their spirits soaring. They were heading west, to a new and a promising land, A land where a person was judged not by the circumstances of their birth, but by the content of their character. A land where a union forged in courage and in love was not a scandal, but a celebration. A land where they could, at long last, build a life that was their own. And as the carriages rolled away, leaving the city of Savannah and its rigid and its unforgiving world behind, a gentle and a cleansing rain began to fall, washing away the tears and the sorrows of the past, and nurturing the seeds of a future that was as bright and as boundless as the vast and the open sky. The Georgia triplets who had fallen in love with their mother's servants had found their happily ever after, not in a grand and an opulent mansion, but in the simple and the profound truth that love, in the end, is the only thing that truly matters.